You're listening to Ants Talk.
My next guest has lived in many countries across 4 continents, has had a gun to her head, a knife to her chest, and has carried over $100,000 in her socks across the city of Buenos Aires. She's lived this adventurous life ever since hitchhiking from a village in Bavaria to Amsterdam at the age of 16. Let's delve more into her adventures. Welcome to the show, Regina Huber. Hi, Regina. How are you?
Hi, Anthony. Well, it's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me today.
Likewise. Thank you. When I put the call out for some guests for the podcast and I got your email, I was just like, oh, my God, what a story.
I have many.
I know. It's fascinating. I can't wait to delve more into it. So, Regina, tell us more about the story when you had a gun to your head.
Well, the gun to my head, actually, I've had that. I should say that was even twice, but I can tell you a quick story about one time when I still lived in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. That was before I moved to New York about 8 years ago. And I had a friend visiting from Germany, and she brought some cash, and we went to the bank and we had the cash exchanged, but there are not a lot of banks to do that in Rio de Janeiro. And of course, you know, some of the gangs know where those banks are. Yeah. And then my guess is also they have some probably informants in the bank itself. And so we were walking outside with all that cash, and I gave her half. I put half of it into my pockets actually. And so we were walking to a restaurant, and I told her all the security measures that we had to observe, not take a taxi outside the bank and blah, 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 the typical thing in Rio de Janeiro, because I'd lived there for a while, so I knew how to behave. But the thing is, we were just walking into the garden of that restaurant. My friend was walking in front of me, and I had the other half of the money in my pockets. And there was this guy all of a sudden from a motorbike, and he came up to me and he grabbed my arm and he said, "Give me the money." And I said, "Okay." I just gave him my bag actually, and he went with that. So he grabbed my arm. I had the gun to my head, and he said, "Give me the money." And all I could think and do at this moment was just have my back. And of course, all the money was in my pockets.
That is hilarious. He's probably still wondering what happened.
I know. Poor guy.
Oh, that's. And what about the knife to the chest? Tell us about that story. Well,
that was much earlier in my life. That was when I lived in Spain, in Madrid. And one night I was walking home, and I didn't really feel particularly unsafe in Madrid ever. So I just was walking outside it was pretty late. I was walking towards a corner, and I noticed that I didn't have enough cash for a cab. And at the time, it wouldn't have been a big amount, and usually we paid by cash. So what happens is I stopped by an ATM, which you would never do in Rio de Janeiro. And by the way, you couldn't even do that because they are closed after 10 p.m. or something like that. I can't even remember. But in Madrid, you could use them all night, as in New York or anywhere else, right? So I stopped by, and I was just going to get out some money, and there's a guy all of a sudden behind me with a knife. But I don't know why, but I just started like screaming and shouting and running to the corner, because I knew that there were a lot of cars driving by. I mean, nobody even noticed who was driving by, but this is how I escaped the situation, because he got scared and he left.
It's funny. It's funny in those situations how it makes you feel after it, how it really does affect you. And then also fast forward to now, how we retell the story, and it's so casual. Right. I remember myself, I actually was in Sydney, and I was walking home from work, and it was quite dark. And I actually had, I think it was about $2,000 in my bag, because I was about to move into a new place the next day, and that was my bond. And I remember that I walked this street a million times a day, and just happened to walk past a hotel that was on the street, and there was a little laneway next to that. And all of a sudden, these two guys come out from the laneway, walking behind me. And then one comes up next to me and says, "Oh, give me some money. And I was like, I don't have any money. And he was like, you do. Give me some money. And I was just like, no, I don't. And then all of a sudden, he's pulled me into a headlock and has got a knife to my throat. And it was almost like a dream. Like, it was just such a weird, I mean, it's never happened to me. So it was such a surreal experience. And I remember that I'd learnt this one move: bring your hand up behind your face and hit them in the face. So I did that. And luckily enough, he dropped the knife and I got the chance to run. And then I ran into the middle of the road and they grabbed my bag that I had around me. And we were sort of doing almost a twirl thing in the middle of the street. And then he pulled me in and he got me in a headlock and starts punching me on the top of the head. And then luckily, a whole group of people saw this and started running down towards us. And they thankfully came to my rescue. But I was so shaken afterwards, especially because I was also injured because the smacks in the head and stuff like that. But now I tell the story and it's just, that just happened.
I know. I mean, I was also, in my bag, there was, of course, also a phone and there were the keys to my home and so on. But gladly, we had security at the building. So, in hindsight, it always is very, very different, as you say, And at the time, it always feels extremely invasive, even though we might not get hurt, which wasn't your case, but, it feels very invasive.
Yeah,
very much. I think that's also somebody really walks into your energy in that way, right? So that's the other piece of it.
Yeah, definitely. And so the $100,000 you had in your socks was to buy a house.
It was, and it was actually more than $100,000. It was several $100,000.
Wow!
So because the house I bought in Buenos Aires. That was in Buenos Aires. And it was a hot summer day, and I was buying this house because I was going to open a bed and breakfast. So I just moved from the U.S. to where I lived in California at the time to Argentina. And I'd been to Argentina before, and that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to go back. And then my plan was to open a bed and breakfast, and so I found a house for it. But buying it was a little bit more adventurous than I thought. And I found out, of course, that I had to pay in cash and in dollars. So so I was walking from this place where I picked up my money to the seller's bank, because the way it worked at the time, and I guess it still works that way. I don't know exactly. I haven't asked recently, but you were literally sitting around a meeting table at a bank and counting the dollars. Yeah, so there were several people, at least 2 people for each party, so that no money could disappear, of course, but that was a process to pay for real estate. And so, I had just moved, as I said, from California, I'd left my well-paying job at BCG behind, and I went to Argentina, to a different continent, with this dream in my head, so in my heart. So I had to somehow take that money from one bank to the other, and it wasn't supposed to be safe to take a taxi when you picked up the money. So my only way of doing that was on a hot summer day in Buenos Aires, walking around in long jeans and socks and putting the money into my socks.
That's so funny.
That's how that worked. And then, it was risky. So one wrong move and all that money, all my savings could have been gone, but it worked out. And I figured, sometimes when we want something really bad, we got to
Yeah, indeed, definitely. Now, how did you come to be hitchhiking at the age of 16?
Well, that's also sort of an interesting story, because I grew up on a farm in a small village in Germany. And actually, as a little girl, I was extremely shy. Now I speak, I go out and speak all over the world, but that was not me as a little girl. But deep down, I always was tremendously curious, and I had this adventurous spirit inside of me. And so I would always dream about other places, other countries on the planet, places like Italy, Brazil, New York City, and also what life would be like in those places. And I even remember that at the time, Chile was often in the news because of the dictatorship at the time and all of that. And so I looked up all these places that I saw in the news, and we had this old globe at home, and I would look at that old globe and dream about places like, where I wanted to travel to in the future. And of course, at the time, we never traveled for a vacation because my parents had a farm, and so they basically never had a vacation.
Yeah.
So we couldn't really travel. So at the age of 16, I decided to take my travel destiny in my own hands, and I hitchhiked all the way to Amsterdam. And that was with another friend, another girl. She was actually 18. And we hitchhiked to Amsterdam together. And so we started out on a rainy day. I remember it as if it were yesterday. On a rainy day in a village, started hitchhiking, and it took us probably 2 days to get to Amsterdam. I remember we had 5 days or so available, and we spent at least 3 days on the road.
Wow!
But it was a very interesting experience. Partly also on trucks. And of course, at the time, there were no cell phones.
No.
So there was no way to communicate while we were on our way to Amsterdam. And when we finally got there, we would find a payphone.
Yeah.
There was also not even euro at the time, so we had to exchange money first and then find a payphone and call home and all of that. So that was that adventure.
It's incredible. The sense of adventure that we had as youth, and especially back in the times when we were young, it was such a different time. And I mean, I know myself that some of the things I look back at what I did, and I mean, I hitchhiked myself once. I mean, it was only home from a nightclub, but just the thought of actually doing it, it's just like, where was my brain at? But B, at the same time, I'm glad I had that sense of adventure. Because it was things like that sort of taught me, don't ever hitchhike again.
Well, we hitchhiked all the time, actually, because there were no buses. I grew up in the countryside. I grew up in a rural area. So the only buses we had were for school. So there was transportation to school, but there were no buses. And we had bikes. So we were, in the summer, it was not a problem. In the winter, we didn't have any type of transportation. We depended on friends, and if they were not available to pick us up, we hitchhiked. That was very common at the time.
Yeah. Well, even back when I hitchhiked, it was so common. I mean, and the only reason it really stopped is that we did have a huge time where hitchhikers were being picked up and murdered by serial killers.
Wow,
I mean, really, that put a stop to it here.
No, it was definitely risky. I mean, I also had an unpleasant experience once, but the guy, let me go. But otherwise, it was always fine. And most of the time, there were at least two of us. So most of the time, always. But then, the other way of traveling, we were talking about travel earlier. What I really enjoyed is also backpacking. I don't know if you ever did that, but I backpacked, for example, with my sister, my youngest sister. I have 4 siblings, and my youngest sister and I backpacked through Central America in 2001 for a few weeks. So
it's definitely a great way to travel, especially when you're young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because we actually started out right now. I'm currently in Mexico. Temporarily, I'm based in New York, but so I was supposed to move when the whole coronavirus thing started. So and I was supposed to also travel quite a bit to Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and so on. So I had all these travel plans for the spring to speak and teach, and I hadn't looked for a new apartment yet. And so I said, okay, I better get out of there before the airports close, and I'm going to be homeless without an apartment because there are no showings, right? So we didn't know what was going to happen. So I came here I had an invitation actually, and I came here to Mexico temporarily. And it's funny because that's where where together with my sister all these years ago, we started our backpacking trip.
Wow.
That I just talked about.
It's funny. I've got a friend that lives in Mexico, and it doesn't look like too bad a place to be stuck.
It does not at all. It really is beautiful here.
This is Ants Talk.
Now, also, you won a lawsuit against the corrupt department of the City of Buenos Aires. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I opened my bed and breakfast, I had an investor's visa. And what that means is I had to open a bed and breakfast or a business, which was my bed and breakfast, within 12 months. So I had to build out the house, which already is a bit of a challenge because a lot more things were done manually than, back home in Germany, for example. But I got it all done. It was all ready. I also had to employ at least one person within the 12 months. So I did that. I employed a person and I was ready to open, and I opened. And the thing is, they don't give you a license within that time. So I did all the paperwork, but then, you cannot fulfill both prerequisites, both conditions at the same time, because it's just not possible. So what happened is, and I know many of the other B&Bs didn't have that either, because I was talking to other owners, right? And they said, well, yeah, we're still waiting too. But I also found out that a lot of people probably, although they didn't say that, they probably were paying the inspectors off. So one day the inspectors were at my house, and actually my place wasn't even big enough to fall into the category. I actually had one room closed. I technically would have had 4 rooms for rent, so 2 double, 2 single, but I had one closed so that I wouldn't have a problem, because I found out that if I only rented 3, I didn't actually need a license. Wow. So one day these inspectors came and they said, no, because they come and they want money, basically. Yeah. I've lived, in different places where it's a little bit tough with corruption. And so I didn't let them in, but then they found me, and I went to the department, I can't remember what it's called actually, but at the City of Buenos Aires, and I said, well, why am I being fined? And they said, well, you have to pay this fine, blah, blah, blah. I said, I didn't say anything, but I went home and I said, I'm not going to pay this fine. And I actually contested it. And it turned out that I had a female judge who was not at all into corruption. So when she heard the word corrupt or pay off or something like that, I can't remember what exactly I said, but she listened up. And that was really my chance. I did have a lawyer, but frankly, the lawyer didn't do his work. These lawyers had a lot of work because a lot of people needed them, so they didn't really do much work for them. But I did my own work, and so I won the lawsuit, yes.
That's amazing.
Very proud to say I never gave in once to corruption, although it was tough oftentimes.
I bet. Now, what do you do with yourself these days?
Well, I have a coaching, speaking, and training company, and it's called Transform Your Performance. It's based in New York City. I work also in the field of diversity and inclusion, and I lead a diversity and inclusion roundtable as well in New York. So my specialty is around transformational leadership coaching. I also bring a multicultural background to this work, yes, and a lot of different passions that flow into this work as well, such as, strangely enough, dance, which has taught me a lot about leadership, a lot about teamwork, but also a lot about energy and about nonverbal communication, business presence, and all these different things that are so important in business for anybody. I have been working a lot more with women than with men, but I also do work with men, and I've also done some pro bono projects with youth. In the last 2.5 years or so, I've spent about 9 months on the African continent in several different countries. And yeah, I love to inspire audiences. I love to share my wisdom, and of course the coaching and the diversity work.
It's actually amazing. You mentioned dance and movement there, and I don't think people realize how important it actually is. It's funny, when I was very young, I did ballet and I did jazz dance myself. And from that point, it was the way I always held myself. I have people come up to me in the street and say, "Oh my God, your posture is amazing." And even a little old lady that had that disease where she was huddled over and bent over came up to me one day and said, "Your posture is beautiful. Don't ever, ever sway from what you're doing because you'll end up like me." And I always remember her saying that to me.
Wow.
And it's funny because ever since that point, people have always assumed that I'm a very confident person. And I'm really not.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite shy, but I've got a great bravado and just that ability to hold myself. I think it's been essential in my life. It really has been.
It makes a difference for your presence. It makes
Yeah.
a difference also for your charisma, and even just the posture itself has an impact, as we now know, also through Amy Cuddy's studies, right? And, I mean, I already knew it through my holistic studies. I also study a lot of holistic healing sort of on the side, but you know, she proved really that our posture and our gestures also have an impact on our mind and how we feel and how we show up and and how confident we feel and all these things, right? So it's really, really important. And I didn't grow up with dance because I was in that little village, right? And at the time there was no internet. But I remember I always liked seeing any dance shows. There was not that much at the time, but something there was on TV, or you know, anything that slightly looked like dancing. And later on, I started dancing much later, really in my early 20s, I should say. And it all started with Latin dancing. Then I, of course, lived in Argentina. I translated books on Argentine tango. I did Argentine tango as well. And then, of course, in Brazil, all the different dances from samba nupe to gafieira to, you know, zouk and all these different dances. They have their, and the forró and whatnot, they have all these different dances. Also Afro-Brazilian and Afro-Cuban, and then in California. And then now I mostly do African dancing and Caribbean dancing and more so, but then a little bit of West African traditional. There's so many different African dances. Oh my God, whenever I travel, I look out for that and I'm always surprised. But you know, now what I personally love for myself is especially Congolese and Dombolo dancing, and also the Afrobeat. People dance at parties and so on, yes. And some Caribbean compa and so on, Haitian dancing.
I know, it's such a beautiful world, the world of dance, it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've also written a book titled Speak, Stand Out, Shine. Tell us more.
Yeah. So it's called Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine. And it's on Amazon as Kindle and as print. The book is really a result of an experience that I had in Brazil. Before I moved to New York, I had a very painful experience with my the business I had in Brazil, where I had a fraudulent business partner, which in the end cost me my business and a lot of money and all my self-esteem. Yes. So when I moved to New York and had to build a brand new network, also after 8 years of speaking mostly Portuguese and Spanish, and coming back to the US and now speaking English again. I'd lived in the US before, but 3.5 years, right, in California, but now I was coming back after all this time, building a new network, figuring out what was going to be next, building a new, first of all, a new idea. It wasn't even a business yet. And having to speak about it while networking and then in front of groups to really pitch my business, which was still in its baby shoes. And all of that was very challenging. So I had to come up with some tools on how to really show up more powerfully in those situations, how to feel more confident and how to really also engage my audience so that they would actually listen to me. And I came up with some tools to mentally, physically, and energetically prepare for challenging situations in business, such as speaking, whether it's online as we're doing right now or offline, whether it's in networking situations, in meetings, whatever it is. And those tools I eventually compiled into this book. And It's apparently helped a lot of people. I still use those tools, not all of them all the time. They're simple, they're easy to learn, and they're effective.
It's fantastic. So, Regina, tell us, or tell the audience, where can they find more about you?
Yeah, sure. So my website is the same as the name of my business, transformyourperformance.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as Regina Huber, and I'm on Facebook with a page, Transform Your Performance, same name as a business. I'm also on Twitter as Transform Dance, and on Instagram, Regina Huber NYC for New York. I'm most active, I have to say, professionally on LinkedIn. And of course, my book is on Amazon. Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine. And that's me.
That's fantastic. Regina, I really appreciate you chatting with us. I just think that your adventures are absolutely mind-boggling and just so interesting. I absolutely love hearing about them. They're fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for having me and
it's my pleasure
doing this also. I definitely also want to listen to many, many more of your podcasts. They seem amazing.
Oh, I've had some amazing guests and I'm having some more like yourself coming up. So definitely tune in. And of course, if you're going to tune in, also subscribe, listeners, because we have such fascinating guests just like Regina coming up. Thank you again, Regina. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who has been listening.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Speak soon.
Ants Talk. It's like Oprah, but not.